If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist, the best boxing, learn and listen and learn on the internet. My name is Frank Lotierzo, former fighter, part-time writer, full-time advocate and observer, joined by former 6-term president of the BWAA, Boxing Writers Association of America, Mr. Jack Hirsch. We have a big show tonight. We're going to talk the current status of the welterweight and lightweight divisions. There's a lot of fights to go over. We're going to highlight Jimmy Young, former heavyweight contender of the 70s. Our anniversary fight is going to be the second fight between Sugar Ray Robinson and Jake LaMotta, the first time Sugar Ray Robinson was defeated as a pro. And we're going to have some fun with Mr. Nat Fleischer's ratings of the heavyweights in 1972. So, Jack, I'm going to kick it off to you. Hope you had a good weekend. We have a lot to talk about. And I'll let you kick it off, and I think I know where you're going to go. You're going to go with Gary Russell, right?
No, that was the week before.
Keith Thurman, the welterweight Gary Russell.
Well, Keith Thurman and Gary Russell share something in common: inactivity. It seems like both of them are businessmen. They fight when they want a big payday. They like to see the checks, come in. And Keith Thurman, after more than 2 years out of the ring, following his loss to Manny Pacquiao, good fight, good close fight against Pacquiao, but nevertheless he lost. It's taken him over 2 years to get back in the ring. He fought a credible but safe opponent this weekend in Mario Barrios. Keith Thurman was a clear favorite. Mario Barrios was in reality a lightweight / junior welterweight, moving up to welterweight to fight Keith Thurman. So Keith Thurman was expected to win. The question would be, how impressive. And he did look fairly good, winning a lopsided decision. He hurt Barrios a few times along the way, but didn't get him out of there. And Barrios' other high-profile opponent, his other previous loss was to Tank Davis. So people are going to want to compare, because those are the only two elite fighters Barrios has ever fought. And Tank stopped Barrios, I think, in 11 rounds, but Barrios was more competitive against Tank. So to me, I care to call it a tie. Thurman looked better against Barrios, but Tank Davis got the better result because he did something Thurman couldn't do. He got Barrios out of there before the final bell. What do you think?
And he dropped him 3 times, Jack. And I don't know if you follow this, but a lot of boxing guys, and when I say a boxing guy, I mean a guy that knows boxing. I don't mean a historian who can look in a book and tell me dates and weights. I mean a guy that knows boxing. And there are a few guys who you and I both respect. And I noticed on Saturday, a lot of the trend was trending towards Barrios upsetting Thurman. We both had Thurman by decision. I agree with you. He handled Barrios better than Tank did, but I think there was a little method to that. I don't think Thurman really wanted to mix it up. I think he was hurt by a body shot that I saw in, I think, the 4th round. I think Tank also goaded Barrios into trading and opening up, and when he did, that was pretty much the end of it. I think it says more about Tank, his skill set, and how hard he punches for his weight. As far as Thurman goes, look, it's a good win. The problem is, Jack, these guys, they forget in this sport, no matter who you are, absence doesn't make the heart grow fonder. It's out of sight, out of mind. At one time, Thurman was the guy. He had some nice wins. But since then, Terrence Crawford, Earl Spence, Virgil Ortiz, and Jaron Ennis has emerged. And there are 4 guys right there who I would pick tonight to handle Thurman without any reservation.
Well, Thurman is more like a businessman. He gives me the impression of a fighter who's ready to cash out, get the biggest paydays. If he wins, great. Then he's going to go on to the next biggest payday. If he loses, he's going to get well paid. Errol Spence had been calling out Keith Thurman for the longest time, the same way Terrence Crawford called out Errol Spence.
Right.
And Errol Spence has been ducking Keith Thurman all this time. Keith Thurman ducked Errol Spence the same way. It's kind of like a merry-go-round, but now Keith Thurman is ready to fight Errol Spence, assuming he beats Ugas, in their upcoming fight, because that's going to give him a big payday going against Errol Spence. And and if he loses, he gets paid really, really well. If he wins, you got Terrence Crawford there. But I don't get the feeling Keith Thurman is really chasing greatness. He talks a little about it.
He says he is.
Right. When a fighter fights once every couple of years and is lackadaisical about it, they kind of become a businessman, such as this weekend. There's a fight. Danny Jacobs is fighting John Ryder in England. Danny Jacobs has come on the classification kind of as a businessman, more or less. Certain fighters are chasing greatness, okay? But sometimes when they get to a certain plateau, they stop. I mean, the young bucks out there, you mentioned Virgil Ortiz, Jaron Ennis. To them, it's a lot more than just the money. They want to be great at this point. Maybe when they become champions, assuming they do, and they get to a lofty position and they've made good money, maybe it'll be strictly about business to them at that point. Who knows? And your main man, who you love to mention, Tank Davis, I don't know what what his mindset is.
Well, it's Mayweather's mindset, Jack. But as far as Thurman goes, it's funny how all of a sudden he mentions Spence and Crawford. Now that he doesn't have a belt, he's not getting the huge money that they're going to get if they fight each other. And I had forgotten about Ugas. I would take Ugas to beat Thurman also. And, I don't think Spence is a lock to beat Ugas. I think Ugas brings a difficult style for him. That'll be a fun fight to talk about. But look, Keith Thurman's made some noise. He's back. It's good for the sport. It's good for the division. But we have to see him in with some good guys. And on the undercard, a guy I like a lot, Leo Santa Cruz, who was also stopped by Tank. He got back in the ring again and scored an impressive win. And I'm not sure I like him at 130. I think 126 is his division. I'm not sure he can make it. I'm not sure he has the punch to go with the 130-pound guys. But Leo Santa Cruz always brings it. He's an action-packed fighter, and it's good that he's back in the mix.
Sometimes you wonder how these guys do business, Frank, how they handle their careers. Leo Santa Cruz's first defeat was to Carl Frampton. I was at that fight at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. A great, great fight. It resulted in Frampton being voted the BWAA's Fight of the Year. Then they have a rematch. Santa Cruz beats him. It should have been a trilogy. They should have had a third fight, and Santa Cruz probably would have won the rubber match.
Yeah, I think he had his style solved.
Right, but instead it never takes place, and you kind of wonder the matchmaking, how they do business. A fighter's really taking the best fight. It seems everyone is so scared of being beaten that they avoid the fights they should have. They're not making the money they should have. So indirectly, they are getting beaten, even though it's not a loss on their record.
We could look back at so many fights that should have happened. We could go back to Joshua and Wilder, Spence and Crawford. It's just a shame because I hate to keep going back to this, but I think Mayweather wrongly trained the fans, and now fighters have this insecure mindset, and there is some truth to it that fans don't care about them unless they are undefeated. And we both know that TV wants undefeated guys to fight.
No, I understand that element, but I wouldn't blame Mayweather. I just criticize Mayweather as far as facets of his own career goes, perhaps. But how do you argue with a guy who's made more money than any boxer in history?
Yeah, that's exactly why. You made my point. Because he's undefeated, and that's what he traded off of. He traded off of being undefeated.
No, my point is this. Guys don't fight when they should fight. A perfect example is going to be, there's a fight that's going to do excellent business in England that's upcoming, Amir Khan against Kell Brook. But Frank, the result means nothing to you or I at this point. They're both past their prime. It's kind of a little bit like an old timers day. Had they met when they were younger, the result would have meant a lot to their legacy.
Right, it means nothing now.
No, it doesn't mean anything. But why are they fighting now? Because they have no other alternatives. They can't avoid one another. So they're fighting. Amir Khan can't get a big money fight against them.
No, and neither can Kell Brook.
Can't Kell Brook. So now they have to meet one another. It's there. They're fighting, and if people want to see it, fine. But, it is going to do really good business in England and whatever, So.
It's funny. I bash Mayweather a lot, and I disagree with you. I think he has a lot to do with the way fighters manage their careers today. But, we never talk about regarding Floyd. Jack, again, I think Floyd's a little overrated, but you could also make a case because he never really tested himself and pushed himself that we may not have ever seen the best of him. He may have even been better than what we think and what our perception is, but he never really had, other than Diego Corrales, that signature fight where he had to really dig down like Hearns did against Leonard. Leonard against Hearns.
He dominated Corrales. He didn't have to dig down in that fight.
That's what I'm saying. But, that was the best guy he fought who was undefeated at his natural weight and in his prime. And Mayweather dropped him 5 times. But I'm just saying, if Floyd would have fought the guys that were there when they were at their best, he may have been pushed more, and we may have seen even a better version.
The one fight that he kind of avoided early on was Antonio Margarito.
Wanted no parts of him, nor Paul Williams.
Floyd, but he would have beaten Margarito, just too quick, shifting in and out. Or who else did you say?
I'm not sure he would have defeated Margarito that fought Paul Williams or Paul Williams of that night.
Paul Williams would have been a serious problem because he was long and lanky and
threw a lot of punches, had power.
Punches, absolutely. But I don't think there was the demand, the pressure to fight Paul Williams as there was to fight Margarito and then later Manny Pacquiao. Those were the 2 fights that I would say he avoided. But Pacquiao was just as guilty as Mayweather during that time. I mean, they were both.
Yeah, they should have fought in 2010. Mayweather wins, but it's a better fight.
But it's hard to have sympathy for Antonio Margo Cheeto, what he did with the hand wraps and all when you think of it. And, he did fight. I don't mean this to be a Mayweather segment, but he did have very good opposite. Gennaro Hernandez was an even money fight when they entered the ring at the time, even though I knew Mayweather was too good for Hernandez at that point in his career. Miguel Cotto was still a tough customer in there. Pacquiao went on a winning run after losing to Mayweather. But I know what you're saying, Frank. I agree. It doesn't compare.
Miguel Cotto, Jack, but you know what? Miguel Cotto was devastated by Margarito and Pacquiao by the time Mayweather got him. And that's my whole bit with Mayweather. If you look at all his big names, they were all, except for Corrales and Canelo, they were all defeated more conclusively by someone else by the time Mayweather got him.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate now. I'm only playing devil's advocate on one of my favorites, and I think one of your favorites too, Sugar Ray Leonard. He's one of your favorites, right, Frank?
He's one of the best fighters of my lifetime since I followed boxing.
Let me play devil's advocate here. He beats Hearns the first fight, a legendary fight, and Sugar Ray says no rematch. He wasn't. They fought 8 years later, and they only fought then because Sugar Ray felt, Hearns had slipped a lot more than he had. It was a safe fight.
Looked horrible against James Kitchen in his fight before.
When he took on Duran, some people were picking Duran. I picked Leonard by decision the first fight. But Duran really was a lightweight that moved up to welterweight. But he did beat Carlos Palomino, so I guess he did have a little...
And he fought 9 times above 145 before he fought Leonard.
Yeah, okay, yeah. But I think the mindset may be a little smaller guy. Okay, I give him that. He fought Duran. That was a challenge. But when Leonard fought Hagler, he had to fight him because Leonard was considered past his peak on the comeback trail. He had to give in and fight Hagler. There was no one else to fight where he could make a big payday and be on the big stage. So I don't want to say, oh, he took the challenge and fought Marvin Hagler. You know, he had to basically do that at that point.
Jack,
yeah.
Jack, are you serious? Nobody asked for that fight except Sugar Ray Leonard. He was long retired. He asked for that fight. Now, I believe he asked for that fight because he saw Hagler's
challenge. He wanted the
and
challenge.
He knew that the name would be big on his record and that Hagler had forgotten about him, but he knew Hagler would never turn him down. As long as Hagler got as much or more money, and he got more, he was going to take the fight. But as much as I love Leonard, look, you're right. He thought Duran was a lightweight, would look good on his record. He didn't know that the Duran he fought that night was one of the greatest fighters of all time that night and would have beaten many great welterweights. As far as Hearns, he had life and death with Hearns the first time, and you're right, he made him wait. Second fight was a joke. Third Duran fight was a joke. But his run between 79 and 81, when he fought Duran twice, went 1-1, beat Benitez before that, who was undefeated, Kaluli, who was undefeated, then Hearns, who was undefeated. He has his signature wins against guys of all-time greats.
I'm playing devil's advocate here because I'm a big Leonard fan. But when he fought Benitez, he had to fight Benitez because Benitez.
That he did. He wanted to be the champ.
Right. The first Hearns fight was voluntary. It was a showdown. Kudos to Leonard. He could have avoided that fight. You know, and I always wonder the story that I heard that Angelo Dundee said they want, you know, about a year and a half before they actually fought, a year and a half, 2 years, when they were both hot welterweights on the way up, there was talk that Mike Trainer, Leonard's manager, wanted to match Leonard against Hearns in Rhode Island, the 10-rounder that was.
I remember that.
And Angelo Dundee said he killed the fight. He wanted it to get bigger. I'm going to tell you, had they fought that fight a couple of years before, I think Hearns outpoints him over 10 rounds. And
Jack, that's very plausible. Jerry Quarry's management tried to do the same thing with Frazier after Frazier went out to fight Scrap Iron Johnson, and they sparred. And I know a guy that was there, that was Jack McKinney, and he said on one of the days they sparred, Quarry got the better of Frazier, and Quarry's people wanted to make the fight. Yank Durham shot it down. He goes, no. He says, let's wait till one of you had the title. It'll be worth more money, and you'll be more ready. So
what would have happened, hypothetically, had Frazier, after that, entered the 8-man tournament when Ali was out? I mean, he obviously would have won the tournament, but no one ever discusses the matchups, because what would have happened would have been they substituted Leotis Martin for Frazier. So let's put Frazier in Leotis Martin's place. That means Frazier would have fought Jimmy Ellis in the first
round.
He would have first round, and he would have beaten Jimmy Ellis, 7 rounds or so, let's call it. Thereabouts in a fight like that.
Because Ellis is more in shape back then, and Frazier isn't as good as he was in 70.
Right. So Ellis wound up fighting Bonavina, but Frazier would have fought Bonavina in the second round. So the guess is, based on their prior 2 fights that went the distance, let's give Bonavina the benefit of the doubt that Frazier outpoints him over the distance. Maybe Frazier stops him, you know, but I don't see Bonavina winning. And then
25 rounds, though, Joe never had him close to going, so he decisions them.
Frazier and Quarry in the final in Oakland in 1968, which would have been 1 year before they first fought. So Frazier was better 14 months later when they fought, you know, June 23rd, 1969, as opposed to April 27th.
So we would have seen the Frazier who fought Buster Mathis fight Quarry.
Right, for the most part. Would Quarry have, you know, who never could have beaten Frazier when he was at his best, would Quarry have maybe had an outside chance with a Frazier who was 14 months less experienced, based on what you're telling me on the gym workout?
I think it's plausible, Jack. I would pick Frazier, but I think there's a shot that Quarry, if they fight in April 68. But then again, if you take the Quarry that fought Jimmy Ellis and match him up against the Frazier that fought Mathis, I don't see an avenue for Quarry to win.
No. Well, Quarry had a bad back. He had surgery on it after the Ellis fight. And Quarry did
Right.
the Mathis very widely. But,
3 months before he fought Frazier.
Right. I could tell you if Frazier and Quarry fought 10 times, Frazier would have won all 10. I could say that, okay? And I don't think, I think you believe that as well. But if Quarry fought Mathis, let's say they fought 5 times, I think Mathis wins 1 out of 5.
I think he would too, based on his style. He would decision jury one night.
Yeah, exactly.
I also think, and I agree with Pone Kingpatch that Ellis did look great. He took Leotis Martin apart, and I'll tell you what, I believe if Quarry and Ellis fought 3 times, I think Quarry would probably win 2 of the 3. I think he had a better heavyweight career than Jimmy.
It was close. Ellis told me that Quarry hurt him so badly and nearly knocked him out. But if Quarry only knew how badly Jimmy had told me when I interviewed him while he was still alive, if Quarry would be so upset with himself, Ellis said, if he knew how badly he hurt me, he had me on the way out. I can only guess that was the 13th round, like when he stunned them.
That's when Quarry was coming on.
Right. But speaking of fights, Frank, what's our anniversary fight tonight?
Our anniversary fight is the second meeting between undefeated Sugar Ray Robinson, 40-0, and on his way to 40-0, he beat LaMotta, Gennaro, Angot, Servo, Zivic, and Maxi Berger on his way to being 40-0, and he fought all of those guys basically, or 4 of the 6, 2 times. He fights LaMotta, and they had fought 2 or 3 months before that. Robinson wins a decision, and now they have a rematch. Again, Jake's had a 16-pound advantage over Ray. Nobody would fight anybody or either one of those guys. That's sort of why they fought each other. Robinson swallowed the fact that he was going to spot weight. And the fight was even, Jack, for about 7 rounds. And then LaMotta really came on in the 8th,
That's
9th,
Basilio up there
and 10th.
But we'll take Carmen with Sugar Ray.
Right. Yeah, that's Basilio. Looks like the second fight based on Basilio's eye. Anyhow,
yeah.
But anyhow, LaMotta really came on, hurt Robinson, knocked him through the ropes in the 8th round. The fight, some people say, was saved by the bell. LaMotta gets a decision. Now they're 1-1. They fight 3 weeks later, and Robinson beats him back in a decision. But going into that second fight, Robinson was a 3-1 favorite, and I think the scores were 52-47, 55-45, and 57-49 for Jake. And as I said, Ray was a 3-1 favorite. And it says something about both of them, that they were so willing to fight each other at a drop of a hat, fighting twice in 3 weeks. You'd never see anything near that today. And I laugh at the people that think that Robinson couldn't handle middleweights, because if you think about it, is it safe to say LaMotta's a top 10 all-time middleweight?
It's arguable. We'd have to sit down and look at it.
But if somebody said, Jack, I have LaMotta in my top 10 all-time middleweights, you wouldn't say he was a moron.
I wouldn't off the top of my head. I'd accept it. If they said
okay,
top 5, that would get my attention.
Exactly. But top 10, plausible.
Yeah.
And Robinson spots him 16 pounds and handles him.
Yeah. Well,
in the second, third fight.
They'd fought a total of 6 times. Sugar Ray won 5. LaMotta won when all was said and done. And that was the second of the 2. But you brought up a good point. And you have to consider when it came to Sugar Ray Robinson's greatness, he was giving up a lot of weight, in all the fights. The only time
Robinson was, LaMotta was a huge middleweight. He never fought at 160. All his bouts were over the weight, except for the title bouts.
Then, only for the last fight, the St. Valentine's Massacre.
He was only 5 pounds bigger.
51, right. You could call Sugar Ray finally a middleweight because he challenged that title. The amazing thing was after Robinson lost to LaMotta, okay? Well, he went into that fight counting the amateur contests on a winning streak of 129 fights in a row from the amateurs through the pros. Imagine that, 129 wins in a row. Then he loses to LaMotta. And like you said, Frank, he beats him 3 weeks later, but he had another fight in between that. That's insane. Right. Can you imagine another fight between that? Now, can you imagine a couple of top fighters in the world today? One beats another, tough fight. 3 weeks in the ring again? That's insane to think about it. 3 months would be considered wild if they did something like that. They wouldn't probably face one another until like about 9 months later, or something.
If you think about it, Jack, it would be like Terrence Crawford fighting Jamal Charlo twice in 3 weeks.
Yeah,
we'll never see that one time, let alone twice in 3 weeks. And there is some discrepancy about Robinson being 85-0 as an amateur. I read he lost a few times as an amateur. I'm not sure about that, but the stated record was 85-0 and then the 40-0 going into the LaMotta fight.
Well, that could have been, but we do know this. After he lost to LaMotta, I think in his next 85 fights, he didn't lose, something like that after that.
His prime record was 128-1-2 with 87 knockouts when he lost to Turpin.
Right. So he had a streak of so many wins in a row. Someday someone should sit down and compare Robinson's winning streak to Joe DiMaggio's. I guess Joe DiMaggio's hitting streak. I guess Joe DiMaggio's hitting streak is legend that people like to point to, but Robinson's would be right behind. I think DiMaggio's different sports and so on, but it's
Robinson has one of the best resumes ever. LaMotta was his career rival, and it says a lot that he beat him 5 out of 6 times. And the only time they fought, when they were within 5 pounds of each other, Robinson won by stoppage.
Yeah, absolutely. But great win by LaMotta. And he always fought Sugar Ray tough. Sugar Ray was just, I don't want to say in a league of his own, because LaMotta certainly could compete with him. And even when the one time Robinson did stop LaMotta in their last fight for the middleweight title, LaMotta was very competitive for 8 rounds.
For the first 8 rounds, it was even.
Right, but he had a lot of trouble making the weight. That plus Robinson's overall skill and endurance and stepping it up. LaMotta eventually kind of fell apart. He just couldn't keep the pace, going.
Robinson said his strategy going into that fight was to set a fast pace because he felt that LaMotta would burn out by the 10th round. And, starting the 9th round on, he really took it to Jake, and he hit him with some of the greatest combination punches I've ever seen any fighter ever throw. It's amazing that LaMotta never went down. What a concrete, tough guy he was.
Now, LaMotta, right. Robinson's generally considered the greatest boxer puncher in history. LaMotta fought, as his nickname said, the Bronx Bull, taking it to opponents. But this guy we're going to spotlight tonight, Frank, I never met him personally. You knew him. I didn't know him at all. I ever talked to him. But one of the slickest, trickiest heavyweights for sure, or any weight, in the 1970s. And he fought also, of course, into the 80s, but it was the 1970s when he made his mark. The second half of the 1970s, from your patch, Jimmy Young of Philadelphia, we spotlight. Why don't you tell us about Jimmy?
Think of this, Jack. First of all, Jimmy Young didn't have many pro fights. Basically managed by the mob for a long time, mismanaged. In his 10th fight, he fights 42-2 Ernie Shavers at the Spectrum in Philly, and he stopped in the 3rd round. They fight a year later in Maryland. It's declared a draw. I've seen tapes of the fight. Young won 7 rounds probably, but he was dropped, I believe, in the 4th round. It was declared a draw. He should have got a decision. Think of Jimmy Young, Jack, from 74 to 77. He fought Shavers twice, 1-1, should be 1-1. Lyle twice, beat him both times. Fought Muhammad Ali, should have got that decision. And then he fights Foreman and Norton, and he beat Foreman. A lot of people felt that he beat Norton, but people were afraid to give that if he got that decision, the mob would have their hand back in boxing again, and that had a lot to do with why he didn't get that decision. He was a slick counter puncher who never fought as the aggressor. His fights were very difficult to score. And while he was in his heyday, just think about this. If he gets a decision over Norton and Ali, think of those wins. Lyle twice, Shavers, if he gets that decision. So he'll have wins over Shavers, Lyle twice, Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, and Ken Norton. No one other than Ali of that era can claim they beat that many good guys. And before I throw it to you, I'm going to say this about the Ali fight. Young ducked out of the ring in the 7th, the 6th, the 8th, the 12th, and the 13th rounds. And he was in one instance, I think, and the 15th, right? And in one, I think in the 13th, they deducted a point. Now, Jimmy told me he did that not because Ali was hurting him. He said he did that just to throw Ali off and to mess with him. I've watched that fight live. I've watched it a few times since. I believe, based on points, Jimmy Young won more rounds than Ali, probably 8-6-1. I don't ever remember a fight where Ali looked so bad and missed so many punches. And that was because Jimmy Young showed the faults of Muhammad Ali never learning boxing fundamentals and basics. Ali never punched to the body, and Ali never liked to fight as the aggressor. He liked you to come to him, then he could time you. He knew where he was going, so he could plot where you were going to be. With Jimmy Young, Muhammad Ali was sort of forced to fight like George Foreman for 15 rounds. Jimmy Young made him miss. And think about this. Another thing that Young exposed about Ali is that Ali barely threw body punches. Jimmy Young gave you his body, and Muhammad Ali never even tried to hit him to the body. He was headhunting the whole time. Look, do I think that was a great Ali? No. 230 pounds, the heaviest he ever was at that time. If they fight and Ali's at his best, he wins a decision, but he never looks good against Jimmy Young based on their styles because he'd have to fight as the aggressor. And Ali always had trouble with smaller, Doug Jones, quick-handed guys. The big bruisers he could handle. Smaller, quick-handed guys gave him trouble. And I thought Young actually deserved the decision. I'm glad he didn't get it because I'm an Ali fan, but I never saw anybody, not Ken Norton, not Joe Frazier, no one made Jimmy Young or Muhammad Ali look as ordinary and average as Jimmy Young did.
A few years before Young fought Ali, Young had less than 10 fights. He was basically a no-name, and I saw him fight at Madison Square Garden and lose a 10-round decision to Randy Newman, who became better known as a referee. But was an incredible pro. And I remember thinking, it's not so much what Newman is doing, it's what Young's not doing. He was so passive, so defensive. He basically fought not to get hurt, didn't get hurt, lost the decision, and that was that. So to see him improve the way he did was a bit of a surprise. I never saw the Shavers fights, by the way. I should go to YouTube sometime and look at them. But Young, I guess he burst onto prominence when he upset Ron Lyle.
That was his coming out party. That was his arrival.
Right. Lyle had earned a shot at Muhammad Ali at the world title. And when Young beat him, it looked like all of Lyle's good work was going to go down the drain.
And he still got the shot.
He still got, which was fair. You want to know something? That was fair. He lost the fight. Big deal. But he did so much to lead up to that. I think Ali made the right choice. Give Lyle the shot anyway, and Young will get his shot later on. And that's the way it came out. You alluded to something that was obvious. Ali just wasn't in shape against Young. He was he was completely out of shape. Now, Ali's a rarity. He could be out of shape and still conserve himself to go the distance. But it was a pretty dreadful Ali. If you believe in the punch counts, if you swear by them, then Ali was an obvious winner of the fight because the punch stats heavily favored him, which didn't surprise me. Now,
wait, Jack, are you talking about the Jimmy Young fight?
The Jimmy Young Muhammad Ali fight.
Young outlanded Ali 222 to 113.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, no, you said Ali outlanded him. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right. If I said that would
okay, I thought that's what you meant.
I meant Young outlanded Ali clearly. But I scored it for Ali by 1 point because of what you'd alluded to. 5 times during the fight in 5 different rounds, Young stuck his neck out the
literally rope. Stepped out of the ring almost.
Let me tell you something. The rules say that if someone deliberately sticks their head out of the ring to avoid an opponent that's attacking, that should be called a knockdown. The referee only officially called it once. Now, why did I still score those rounds for Ali that one officially scored a knockdown? Let me ask you this, Frank. If you're seeing 2 guys fight and one guy cleanly hits the other guy on the chin and drops him, but the referee calls it a slip, you might very well score that round for the guy landing the punch because you know what you saw. You might say the ref blew it. I'm giving him that round. That was my logic. I was ticked off that he deliberately was avoiding Ali's attack, whatever the reason is. Young could say he wanted to fluster Ali. I don't care what his reason is. It's irrelevant. The point is, it's outrageous. That means any opponent in any fight who's in any type of trouble, all he has to do is stick his head out the ropes, and then the ref comes.
They should have penalized Young and threatened to disqualify him. They messed up there.
Right. Okay, let me ask you this. Had the referee, let's say hypothetically, counted those as knockdowns every time Young stuck his head out, we wouldn't even be having an argument who deserved the decision. All those extra points, that would have been the equivalent of 4 or 5 knockdowns. That would have certainly tilted it to Ali beyond the question of a doubt. So if I'm to ignore Young sticking his head out the ropes, yeah, he won the fight. He landed the better punches, was sharper. But the point is he did. So I had Ali actually 1 point ahead at the end based on that, not based on punches landed, not looking better. As far as I'm concerned, he should have been credited with multiple knockdowns in the fight.
Interesting. And I can't argue that, but all I can speak to is what happened when they were engaged for, say, 43 out of 45 minutes. Ali only landed 27 jabs. He never looked so bad because of the style that Young forced him to fight. Now, see, Young didn't train to do that to Ali. That's who Young was. He would fight everybody that way. It just so happened to be that it was kryptonite for Ali. It just didn't work. And the funny thing is, and what I've never understood was they fought in 76. In 71, in the Cherry Hill Arena, after Ali lost to Frazier, Ali did an exhibition. Benny Briscoe was one of the guys. He boxed 3 rounds. And Jimmy Young was another one of the guys he boxed 3 rounds. Now, at that time, Young only has 12, 11 fights, whatever it was. And I always wondered why Angelo Dundee never schooled Ali more on like how this guy's going to fight you, because Young was never aggressive. He'd always make Ali
wouldn't listen to Dundee. Come on, Frank. Do you think Ali would have listened to Dundee schooling him?
But he could have prepped him a little bit better that this guy is going to throw some things at you. They're going to throw you off a little bit, and you're going to have to be on your game a little bit more. But you know what? They were never, like Ken Norton said, Ali was bigger than boxing then. They were never going to give him the title. And what Young did opened the door for them to give Ali the decision. But you know what the funny thing is? Jimmy Young told me when he was fighting Ron Lyle, he said Lyle called him every vile name in the book to try to get him to engage during the fight. He said he insulted my mother, my family, my ancestors, and everybody. He said I knew what he was doing and I wasn't going to fall for his game. And then Young would talk. I would always try to pump him about, Jimmy, who were the hardest punchers? And he never veered. I said, the big four you fought, who were the hardest punchers? Rank them. And he said, Foreman, Shavers, Lyle, and Norton. It's just a shame. A lot of people think that Young lost it and he started to go downhill after he lost to Ken Norton. And after he lost to Norton.
Ken Norton, as far as I'm concerned, Frank.
Pardon me?
I thought Norton got a split decision. I thought Young clearly won the fight.
I thought, and you know what, and Jack, you know what? If you look at the 3 15-round title fights that Ken Norton had, or one elimination fight, and the 15-rounder with Ali and the 15-rounder with Holmes, you realize Jimmy Young shook Ken Norton with his right hand more so than Ali or Holmes ever did. But when he lost that decision to Norton, that took a lot out of him. But you know what the fight was that really killed him, and then he really became a stepping stone? I was in the gym when he got the fight to fight Jerry Cooney, and Don King, and I heard him say this. Don King told him, if you beat Cooney, you have Holmes. And Holmes has never been shy about how he never wanted to fight Young because of his style, and he saw how bad he made Ali look. And Holmes, like Ali, had the same trouble with Michael Spinks, especially the first time they fought. Holmes didn't want any part of it. Jimmy actually trained pretty hard, and that was the closest he ever had his weight down to the 77 weight, is when he went into the fight with Cooney. And he really trained hard, and he thought, okay, this will be the beginning. I'll beat Cooney, and I'll be back in the mix, and I'll get a shot at Holmes. Before Jimmy Young got...
Before that.
What's that?
The 2 fights with Ozzy Ocasio, he lost those fights.
They were right after Norton when he showed up real fat, right?
I thought Young deserved the decision in both the Ocasio fights as well.
I thought he did in the second fight. I think Ozzy Ocasio outworked him the first fight. And you know what's funny, Jack? Ocasio, who was short and small in stature, he bothered Young. He couldn't hurt him, but he was real busy like a buzzsaw in spots, and he built up points. But that was the beginning, because he had the 2 stinkers with Ocasio after Norton, and then he thought he would get a second reprieve to beat Cooney. He gets in great shape for Cooney. He's actually doing well in the fight, and that was the fight that convinced me that Larry Holmes was going to beat Cooney. Then he gets cut, and he loses. And I've heard you say before how you look at guys, and you look at their records, and you say, how many times they've been stopped? Jimmy Young was stopped by Jerry Cooney on a cut. The only other time Jimmy Young was ever stopped was by Shavers in his 10th fight. Talk about a guy that had a great chin and could make everybody look bad. It was Jimmy Young. And if he was around today, he could hang with these guys today. I really believe that.
Yeah. Speaking of different eras and all, we were going to discuss the segment, how, Young would have fit in the old days without question. He was old school. But not Fleischer, okay? We were starting to talk a little about him on the last show, and I just want to say before we get into topics of old timers, visit current guys and Fleischer's ratings, Nat Fleischer was the single most influential media member in boxing history.
Absolutely.
Far and away, not even close. No one was even remotely close to Fleischer as far as having influence. He started Ring Magazine in the 1920s, and Ring Magazine was considered the ultimate authority until they had the scandal, in the 1970s, the United States.
The map scandal.
Yeah, some other boxing magazines came into existence in the 60s, which provided what I thought was healthy competition, because it gave us boxing more. But Nat Fleischer was the guy. He was the most respected, the most single respected guy in all of boxing. But with that said, Frank, how much can we respect a guy who's so ridiculously biased to the old timers? You tell me.
Jack, I remember as a 10-year-old kid, 1969.
He passed away in 1972, Fleischer.
72, Nat Fleischer did. He started ringing 22. He passed away in 72. I remember reading his ratings for the top heavyweights of all time. And I remember thinking that guys like Bob Fitzsimmons, who he had third behind Jack Johnson and Jim Jeffries, and guys like Fitzsimmons and Jim Corbett, who I believe was fifth. I remember thinking as a kid, 10-year-old kid, looking at those pictures and marveling and saying, oh my God, these guys probably would have killed Sonny Liston and Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. Boy, I wish I was born 90 years earlier so I could have seen these guys. He just made them so big and they all hit so hard and they did everything right. They in-fought, they body punched, they used the jab, they had good defense, they parried. He really was very biased and he ripped the modern day fighters. And in 1972, before he died, he published his top 10 heavyweights. Now help me out here. We had Jack Johnson number 1, Jim Jeffries number 2, Bob Fitzsimmons number 3, Jack Dempsey number 4, Jim Corbett number 5, Joe Louis 6, Sam Langford 7.
Sam wasn't even a heavyweight.
Exactly. Sam Langford 7. Gene Tunney 9, Max Schmeling, Gene Tunney 8, Max Schmeling 9, and Rocky Marciano 10.
You know what made Fleischer's heavyweight rankings so difficult when he did it? Anyone who came after Marciano, there wasn't any wiggle room hardly, meaning you'd have to kick Marciano out of the top 10 to let anyone else go. And it wasn't like a guy like Max Schmeling was number 10 that you can take out. Listen, putting Jack Johnson number 1, it's a matter of opinion.
That was his buddy. That was his favorite fighter.
From his era. Jim Jeffries was considered invincible during his time. It's not a joke of a rating. Jim Jeffries has been given the worst rap on his legacy. He's remembered for the Jack Johnson loss.
Right.
He only lost off the 6-year layoff. So that at least makes sense, even though we could disagree with it.
But that made it easy for him to put his 2 favorites there. Johnson beat Jeffries, so that year you got 1 and 2.
But Bob Fitzsimmons number 3, I called up to Ring Magazine offices when I was a kid to speak to Fleischer, and I just said for kicks, who would have won a fight between Bob Fitzsimmons and Joe Louis? And he said, well, I think it would have been a close fight, but I think Fitzsimmons would have edged him. His associate editor, Dan Daniels, said, don't listen to the old man. Lewis would have murdered Fitzsimmons. And Daniels was an old timer, so that was nice to hear. Okay, number 4, he had Jack Dempsey. It makes sense, at least. Dempsey was considered historically a great heavyweight. The interesting thing is, Fleischer went on record as saying he thinks Dempsey would have beaten Jim Jeffries head-to-head. That was funny. In number 5, he had Jim Corbett, rated too high, but Corbett was, a heavyweight champion, 1892. So Fleischer revered those old guys. But it's a funny thing. He said Corbett, the number 5 guy, would have beaten Jeffries number 4. Number 6, he underrated the Brown Bomber, Joe Louis. Keep in mind, we didn't have any Muhammad Ali that came late on. Louis right now is considered the consensus number 2 greatest heavyweight of all time. On average, consensus. Ali's considered consensus number 1. Louis consensus number 2. But he was of the opinion, Fleischer, I heard when he interviewed him, he thought Louis would have beaten Dempsey head-to-head. That's an interesting thing. So why did he have Dempsey 4, Louis 6? Louis actually accomplished more when you want to look at it that way. Now, number 7 makes no sense. As great as Sam Langford was, rating Sam Langford as the 7th greatest heavyweight of all time would have been the equivalent of you and I putting Sugar Ray Robinson in the top 10 light heavyweights of all time. He didn't fight in that division in reality. Langford did fight heavyweights, but he wasn't a heavyweight, okay?
He fought the black heavyweights that era, though, and had a pretty good record, even though he wasn't a heavyweight.
Yeah, number 8, Gene Tunney, another great fighter. It's hard to argue with number 8, Gene Tunney. Number 9, Max Schmeling, tends to overrate him. Was he really a top 10? He's piggybacking on the Lewis victory, Schmeling, historically. And you can't argue with Marciano 10. So this was 1972. All the guys that came after, Fleischer didn't have a chance to ever rate, and it's safe to say they wouldn't have made his top 10. Tyson wasn't going to make it. Ali was around. Liston was around. Neither of them made his top 10. And Ali was on the second coming of Muhammad Ali, so we knew how great he was in 1970.
But he was coming off the loss to Frazier, and Fleischer held that against him. Here's my issue, Jack. Now, look, everybody says in this sport, you can't rate anybody until their career is over. My problem with Fleischer's ratings are he did the rating in 58. Now, you mean to tell me Joe Louis is retired 7 years, and you can't look back and process about how great his title reign was, how great of a fighter he was, and you mean to tell me, look, if you want to put Dempsey above him, I wouldn't do it, but in 1958, that's not a big deal. But you want to have Lewis behind Corbett and Fitzsimmons.
Fitzsimmons, oh my.
I mean, come on.
He really wasn't a heavy, it was in reality a light heavy.
No, he beat Corbett one time and was losing the whole fight.
And Jim Jeffries, knocked him out twice. And it's, come on.
Jack, here's what I see when I see Fleischer's ratings in 1958 and 72. Number one, I don't like the idea that in 12 years they didn't change. But my issue is this. He made them, look, Johnson was his guy no matter what, no matter who was there, he wanted Johnson number one. Well, if he makes Johnson number one and he has Jeffries 2, that makes the case for Johnson, because if Jeffries is 2, being defeated by Johnson justifies Johnson. And then you look, he loved Dempsey. Don't tell me Gene Tunney should be number 8. I'm sorry, but the fact that he beat Dempsey justifies it. Now, as we go lower, you have to think, Jack, the biggest crime here is this. In 1972, Sonny Liston was dead for 10 years. Matt Fleischer saw Liston's run through the division from 1957 to 1962. I don't care who you take on that list. If you go on a head-to-head basis, except for Joe Louis, I would make Sonny Liston a favorite over every one of those guys.
And he disliked Liston.
He loved him as a fighter, but he hated him because of his outside life and his connections.
Frank, I want to share something with our listeners in regard to Fleischer that you know all too well. A great story, the Ali Liston rematch in Lewiston, Maine. Ali knocks Liston down, regardless of whether you think it was legitimate or not. That's an argument.
I think the punch was legit, but the rest was an act.
But that's something we'll discuss in detail another time. But Liston got up, and what most people forget, the referee Jersey Joe Walcott waved the fighters together, and the fight resumed. When the fight resumed, Fleischer, sitting in the first row ringside on the apron, yelled to Jersey Joe Walcott, the ref. He called him over and he said Liston was counted out. He was down long enough. You should stop the fight. And based on what Nat Fleischer said, calling Walcott over.
Walcott was awed by him and did it.
Right, because Fleischer was so influential. So he played that part in boxing history. And we could speculate for fun also what may have happened had the Ali Liston fight continued, hypothetically. If Liston took a dive up, and got up and thought he had to get up, what was going to happen when the fight, continued.
But Jack, you do realize Liston was never given a count either.
Yeah.
Walcott never counted. And that's when Fleischer said, hey, it's over. He's been down for 10 seconds. I just wonder if Fleischer would have done that, if it was Dempsey, and would he have saved that? Would he have done that with Dempsey and saved him like that? No, he didn't like Liston. And as much as he was falling out of favor with Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali at the time, he thought Liston was worse for boxing than even the future Muhammad Ali would be. But it's like Liston never got a count. They were on their feet fighting when Walcott stopped it due to Fleischer. And I just think it's a crime, Jack, that he was just so biased. Look, O.J. Simpson is one of the best running backs I ever saw. I believe he's a double murderer. But if I'm not going to kick him out of the Hall of Fame, because the Hall of Fame is for how good what you did on the field. You can hate Liston all you want. Liston at that time.
But I don't think that's the reason, Frank. Fleischer wasn't going to rate Liston because Liston was more modern fighter. And to rate Liston meant Marciano wasn't going to be in Fleischer's top 10.
Right.
Marciano was number 10. There wasn't any wiggle room for Liston. It wasn't like.
But it's just so funny because everything about Liston, Fleischer loved. He loved boxer punchers. Liston was a boxer puncher with a good jab. He had everything. It was.
Let me go. Let me just leave the heavyweights. He had Sugar Ray Robinson, the number 5 middleweight. Keep in mind, this was when Fleischer passed away. Monzon was middleweight champion a couple of years,
right?
Thereabouts. So a little less than that. But there wasn't Marvin Hagler yet. But I don't think it makes any difference at all. But, you know, he had Sugar Ray Robinson, the number 5 middleweight of all time. And most people were rating Robinson the greatest middleweight. Now, as time has went by, if we have to rate Robinson in one division, it would be welterweight.
Right.
Number 1 there. If we had one or the other. But
I guess in 72, he thought that Robinson was still a modern fighter, and he held that against him. But, Jack, back to these heavyweight rankings. He said he would not rate Muhammad Ali in the top 10 because he would often say, where am I going to put him? And the fact that he lost to Frazier hurt him. But why not put Frazier there? You know what his bitch was with Frazier? He said, yeah, Joe's really good. He's not much of a puncher. If he was a big puncher, he would have. Well, he actually always called Ali Clay. He goes, if he was a puncher, he would have knocked Clay out. How could you not have Frazier on that list after March 8th?
I'm going to just speculate, just guess, okay? If Fleischer was living all these years, if he could live forever, he would be under such pressure to put Ali in his top 10. And to take Marciano out of the top 10 would have been unthinkable. I think he would have revised the ratings completely and said Langford's now being rated as a middleweight. He would have had to have done that. And he'd maybe put Marciano ahead of Schmeling in a revised rating, and he would get Ali in there at like maybe number 7 or thereabouts. That would just be my guess.
Let me ask you this. What is the mindset to have Schmeling over Marciano? Why? Because he beat Lewis when Lewis was green? Marciano made, 7 title defenses? Schmeling made, 2? And you're going to tell me head-to-head Schmeling can beat Rocky? No way.
I remember when they interviewed Fleischer about Marciano, he said tremendous punching power, but little else more. So he wasn't an admirer of Marciano's skills. But, it's basically the time he came up. But once again, Fleischer was the most influential voice in all of boxing. But I think, some people took his ratings seriously, but it became obvious he was so biased in what he was saying.
But Jack, he did set the template for that even exists today, where there are guys who have never seen some of these guys fight, but based on what Fleischer said, they overrate him.
Sure. Well, we're going to get back to this more next week. And in closing, Frank, I'm just going to say, because we're going to be going off the air, I rate Otto Graham over Tom Brady. I think Otto Graham's the greatest. Only joking, even though it makes some sense what I'm saying. Okay, so
I'm going to go by who I saw. Okay, and on that time, it's impossible to put anybody over Brady.
Okay, only joking. See you next week, everyone. Great time, Frank.